Sveiki, gerbiami žiūrovai. Aš esu Linas Kojala, Rytų Europos studijų centro direktorius ir man malonu.
Good afternoon, I'm Linas Kojala, the director of Eastern Europe Study Center, and I'm pleased that you are watching the second cycle of the discussions Lithuanian Foreign Policy Horizons, and I'm pleased to greet the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, Gabrielius Landsbergis. So several technical aspects for our discussion. We will talk to the Minister about relevant issues of our foreign policy, and later we'll have several video questions that the Minister will answer, and in the end we hope that there will be some time for questions that you can give the Zoom spectators. So throughout the event, please feel free to submit questions in writing, and we hope that we'll have time to answer them. Minister, naturally we will start with Belarus, still the hottest spot. Slightly more than a week has passed since the aggression in the neighboring state. So in your opinion, what was done, both Lithuania and internationally, to respond to this attack? Well, leaving the whole incident aside, which has caused this outcry, and we still hear the echo of this event a week afterwards. So the main thing is that Europe has shown that it can act strongly in a united and quick manner. This is the triangle which seemed to never work together, so strongly or slowly, and some other possible configuration. So this time it was unprecedentedly quick, and the message was very strong. So I believe that first of all, there are two ramifications. First is a clear message to the dictator and other dictators that militarization of civil systems, using them for military goals by air navigation services, will have response. We want our people to feel safe, we want them to trust systems and treaties that they feel safe and protected in the air. Dictator had crossed this line, and Europe wanted others not to follow his example and sent a strong message. The second message is to Europeans that Europe is effective. So sometimes we might be hesitant whether we will be able to respond, maybe we'll be too slow or too weak, but we've managed to consolidate a joint effort. So after political message, practical solutions should come, such as specific sanctions, kind of sanctions to which sectors. Definitely, it is up to 27 member states to agree, but the first steps have already been made, and I think that others will be easier. Did we have to persuade, since Lithuania always wants Europe to respond to such situations, in particular against authoritarian leaders, but not all 27 member states agree, as we know that this is not supranational competence and each state has a veto right. So was there a need to work strongly, or this case was very strong and it didn't leave any space for hesitation? Well, one of the biggest challenges in the Lithuanian foreign policy and the general phenomenon that issues usually are more national or regional than European. Naturally, Eastern Partnership or Eastern policies are relevant for Baltic states, for Nordic states, Central and Eastern Europe, maybe Germany. The same applies to Southern Africa, to southern neighborhoods like North Africa. Usually it's more relevant for southern countries. For Greece, Turkey is a problem. For Italy, Northern Africa is a problem. For Spain, Sahel, and maybe Latin America. So usually we all bring different meals to this joint dinner. But we usually only enjoy our meals, and others enjoy their meals at this joint dinner. So now when many rivers came together, we see issues growing European, up to European scale, and what happened to Ryanair flight last Sunday was definitely a European issue, also practically. There were citizens of 11 EU member states on board. I'm not sure about the recent figures. People of 18 nationalities altogether, not only European, it was actually an international issue. It brought us together. All of a sudden we realized that this is a European concern, but there was another river coming to this big flow was the Russian policy, which we have to bear in mind if we speak about Belarus and Lukashenko. Russia stands behind them, and they pull the ropes, and they pull the strings, and they promote aggressiveness. There are these fantastic photos coming from the joint swimming and navigating. So despite anything, despite this terrorist attack, Russian support is there. As I was talking to my colleague in Italy, he said, look, we have this base in Libya, NATO member state, we try to stabilize the situation in Libya. Dozens of kilometers away, a Russian base is there, and Russian warriors, Wagner mercenary, but we know what stands behind them. It was not their own decision to come. And all of a sudden, Russia, a player which brings confusion to this region, is no longer a problem of Lithuania, Baltic states, Nordic states, or Central and Eastern Europe. All of a sudden, it becomes a European issue, because this region, which started with suppression of Navalny protests in Moscow, it ends in Libya, where there is one base with some troops trying to stabilize the situation, and there is another base standing nearby trying to destabilize the situation. So in a certain way, with this flight situation, we are turning another page in the foreign policy of Europe, first of all. But is this page already turned, or was it a one-off incident? Because unfortunately there was much violence against protesters in Belarus, and the authoritarian regime has been existing for more than 2 decades. So there have been numerous reasons for Europe to respond, and this incident, as grave as it is just one in a row. So is it really a breakthrough, or this is just a short-term momentum? I don't think that this is short-term. I think we are observing changing policies, coming back to this business as usual, the way it was maybe 15 years ago, kind of economic cooperation with Russia. I remember back in 2014 when I started working in the European Parliament, and despite the fact that the war with Ukraine was on, and it was after annexation of Crimea, there was a document leaked which was named Mogherini document, referring to joint economic interest territory between Lisbon and Vladivostok, which repeated previous documents, which means that back in 2014, even amidst the war in Ukraine, it felt normal to speak about it. Later on, politically, probably it was seen as a crossed line. Let's no longer speak about it. Now this argument probably is put somewhere in archives, in the chapter of naive ideas. So it means that we have gone a long path, and this transformation of foreign policy of Europe and understanding of the situation vis-à-vis Russia is a permanent process, and I think we are now in a new stage. But the foreign policy, European foreign policy as such, is taking shape. Europe is becoming an actor. It has to become an actor. It must. For this we have Russia, which encourages us, and we have the US, that I think there was a reason for the American president to say the US was back. So probably sometimes the US was not back. And Europe had this challenge to comprehend itself as a geopolitical player. So I think it's an important time to make another step and to acknowledge that Europe is a geopolitical union, as Madame von der Leyen promised, and to see what's happening around Europe. So this Putin-Lukashenko meeting was really... When you talk to your colleagues in the Committee of Foreign Affairs, whether this link and dependence of Belarus on Russia is obvious to everyone. Since several years ago, especially among analysts, we could have heard that Lukashenko is the grantor of sovereignty of Belarus. He will stop Kremlin from swallowing Belarus, and it will keep at least some sovereignty in certain decisions. Probably there could have been multiple arguments claiming that this independence was never real, since both economy and security policy in these areas and in many others, integration of these two states is very deep, thanks to Lukashenko. So, seeing this link between Putin and Lukashenko, is it seen as the control of a stronger against weaker one? Yes, obviously, it's quite alarming for many, and here we have this kind of play. This is a play of boa and a hare. So the hare still believes that it can avoid, but seeing from outside, it's obvious what will happen next.
Man atrodo, irgi neatsitiktinai, aš irgi pradėjau kolegom atsakydamas, kas bus toliau. Praris ir tada kas...
I heard from colleagues. So what happens next? Will Russia incorporate Belarus? I think the sequence of thinking should be that, first of all, we should not recognize Lukashenko and his regime. He's lost legitimacy in Belarus. We realize that if elections should have been different, the results would have been completely different. And Belarus would be different today, and it would be more sovereign than Russia. Because people already have their own choice of independence. They want to defend their choice of independence and choice to defend their government. If we don't recognize Lukashenko, he rewrites constitution and he signs treaties that further reduces sovereignty of Belarus and they create a joint state, then we shouldn't recognize the illegitimate treaties, because illegal leader can't produce legal treaties or agreements. Therefore, we should ask ourselves how we label this process, if he is not legitimate. I'm not a lawyer, but I believe that it resembles the situation of Crimea, de facto annexation, as Putin, using his powers, tries to kill the Belarusian rabbit, and task for the West, just like in Crimea, there was no referendum in Crimea, it was just taken and annexed. The same is happening to Belarus, with all implications. So, this is the last thing about it, is he might believe that he was escaping democratic elections that would be the end of his political career, or maybe it would lead to some investigations, because dictators usually leave a very long footprint. He was avoiding democracy, and he turned to Putin. However, in either way, it's not his future. Putin will not need him. Sorry, I still use this image. Boa doesn't need to be a friend with rabbit. It just is a snack. So obviously, the political career is about to finish soon. We see him leaving. Is he trying to preserve the state by providing an opposition with an opportunity to organize elections by releasing political prisoners? Or by losing himself, he's also losing the state, and this is the question yet to be answered. And when will Putin no longer need Lukashenko, now or maybe in 5 or 10 years? I think it is about answering what is happening in Russia for Putin, and it's one of major headaches for him. This is why this harsh reaction was to Navalny. I think it's despair, because he realizes that this situation might be unstable one day. And obviously he's trying to stabilize things around him, stabilizing things in Russia and in Minsk, so there are many fires around. So my idea is that probably Putin is trying to stabilize the situation in Russia, secure his legitimacy in upcoming parliament election this autumn, because this election can also be questioned, and it's a question whether it succeeds this way, the same way. There are no major accomplishments in Russia for him to drag about. There are no oligarchs in Russia to buy, and there is no opportunity to sell foreign enemies to people as an argument to vote for him, because it's very different from just showing muscles at the Ukrainian border. It is very different from launching actual military operation in Ukraine, understanding that it will be more difficult than back in 2014, because the Ukrainian army was caught off guard. Now situation is different. So legitimacy is still an issue. If he manages to secure his next tenure according to the new legislation, then why Lukashenko? Maybe there are more effective leaders who can do the same thing without grabbing planes. Coming back again to Belarus and Financial Times, it named
you can see that Lithuanian leadership is quite visible, and our country hasn't seen so much visibility for a long time. But is there anything else but leadership in such crisis time? Do we have a plan that Lithuania wants to complete during the upcoming years? Maybe talking about further interest in Belarus processes. Do we have a plan, a strategy, and resources? Because such things require human, expert, and data resources. If we're talking about the government tasks, the government has a specific program, foreign program. For example, a few points. Number one, we have planned to review or revisit our attitude to and cooperation with Asian states, other regions. We are expanding the diplomatic network, and we wanted to review our activities and cooperation and 17+1 format. And the 17+1, as it was known previously, because it no longer exists officially anymore, it splits Europe and creates certain tension with other states that are not participating in under this format. We should look for something more inclusive. And what is our attitude towards Asia, how we look at it? So we are dependent on one country currently. Why? Because for a long time we thought that Asia is China, China is Asia. We are small, we see a big country, we are in touch with it. And we have major challenges also related to this cooperation with a great country, and we don't counterweight them with other things. We also have other things that are working, for example, the transatlantic relationships. It has been well developed by my predecessor, Mr. Landsbergis. We can just build. I see the reason just to build upon it. In the Eastern Partnership terms, we can be both friends and advocates, and we can also help the EU member states to find their better interest and find why the Eastern Partnership is important, why it is important in Lithuania. It's clear. For example, Lithuania raised a hand, and then the council starts talking. But why would Greece be interested in Armenia or other countries in Sakartvelo? And actually, that's the challenge not only to Lithuania, but to the entire European Union. And I believe it's important to see that's a challenge that's important to all the countries of the European Union, both the Netherlands and Greece and Italy, etc., etc. So, namely, it would be important to see that it's an overall European thing and include, so that we could include more partners into this. Of course, we could talk about attracting investment, but going to such details would take lots of time. Just to mention one more idea that was really mentioned by the international media. Namely that no government program will describe how Lithuanians feel about such things. Lithuanians have lots of heart to fight for freedom, and you don't have to be a member of Landsbergis family or any other family to have this feeling. Lithuanians, without any incentives or provocations, they get together to show their attitude regarding Hong Kong, and there are, I believe, many meetings next to the Russian embassy without any incentivization, and actually I'm honored that we have given political asylums to Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and other political refugees, and we are freedom fighters as we were 30 years ago, and we have just a new generation using different tools and measures NATO and EU to fight for freedom. And I believe one of the tools or instruments is sanctions. And currently we're discussing what should be pressed on in order for the Russian regime to understand that such behavior is not to be tolerated. So could you please talk more about the course of sanctions and what are the weak points in Belarus that we should touch upon? Tobacco, fertilizer, what else? So technically, we have, there were 3 packages of sanctions adopted in terms of certain persons against which such sanctions are applicable. Now we're discussing the 4th package of sanctions. The discussions lasted long, looking for what countries could sign and who could sign for this package. And Lithuania is more or less a proactive member of such process. And this process was not very fast. Discussions take time. And my feeling is that this process could be finalized quite fast. Now, regarding the 4th package of sanctions, the European Council should make this decision. The question is now whether the fourth package of sanctions could be supplemented, namely, would we be able to add additional sanctions and include them into the fourth package and agree about them. We can see that we can have a chance to look for such an agreement. Mr. Borelli already has mentioned that Europe is ready to discuss sectoral sanctions. If we see that we have no agreement on sectoral sanctions by June, end of June, and we would approve of the fourth package and start discussions on the fifth package of sanctions. Now, what could be those sectoral sanctions? Number one is fertilizer. That would be one sector. The question is how much the sector would be affected by the sanctions. To my knowledge, Europe is not a heavy buyer of this fertilizer. We're more transit countries through which that fertilizer is sold to other countries. One of the sectors that generates income to the regime and I believe people to a certain extent is oil products. About 10% of foreign trade accounts for oil products. And financial sector. Half of the debt required or borrowing needs are funded by Russia, the other half by the Western sources. That would be a major signal and a major step. So these are the discussions, namely what sectors would finally be decided upon by the leaders. So we need some time to see those answers, but currently we're positive that this message should be very clear and very strong. I understand that these deadlines are good and satisfactory to Lithuania. They are quite persuasive. Well, you see, the most important and hardest thing was to agree that sanctions were necessary. We would raise a proposal and the leaders would then agree. Now the leaders say that they are necessary and we need a political decision on how to implement this decision. The decision has been made, I believe, and the technicalities of implementing this decision will be seen in the future. Do you see any economic or other costs that Lithuania will pay on in terms of how Belarus regime would react? Well, we count, and I believe all the countries count, but I believe we could find a balance, the right balance that wouldn't really be detrimental to the people of Belarus, and that would show the regime in Belarus that the path they have chosen is not promising. You have mentioned the Eastern Partnership already, and Belarus is part of it, but we understand that based on the progress demonstrated, they are a bit different. So the Eastern Partnership policy counts more than 10 years. Is it a political program or has it turned into some technical process without any clear political, strategic purpose? Because some countries say that in terms of Ukraine, Moldova, and Sakartvelo, it's not preparing for the accession. I believe that the most dangerous thing is to turn this whole process into a technical process, into a technical one, and we can see certain features. For example, Ukraine is one of the most vivid states, most visible states in the whole Eastern partnership process. Or, for example, Sakartvelo. We can see that the country is now sort of in a frozen state, cannot make further decisions that would lead it to the European Union. And we can say that from the political viewpoint, we can see you cannot agree among yourselves, and foreign policy targets and goals have been diluted. And who's the winner in this situation? It's Russia. Now it's hard to name them specifically, but the fact that Russia wins if this country stops coming closer to the European Union. And what happens then? Michel comes over, and he and his team have lots of political experience and advice and assistance. They managed to agree with the opposition, find an agreement, help to find an agreement with opposition, and reach a consensus. And this is the geopolitical Europe. Basically, it shows how we see this region and the expectation of Sakartvelo people. And I believe that was one of the strongest steps that were made recently. We have similar requests from Ukraine, Moldova, and follow-ups from Sakartvelo. I'm not even mentioning signals from Armenia and Azerbaijan. And if people are studying geopolitics these days, this is the place where the true geopolitics takes place. How people's manipulation, emotions are manipulated, the institutional structures, and how the space to make the decisions of these countries is reduced, and the question is, what is Europe's role in this? You could basically create more space for their decisions, instead of just Russia playing its role. And I believe it's my small task to persuade my colleagues to hear this request and follow the promise that Europe will be geopolitical. We have proved it in Sakartvelo, but we can do it in other regions as well. Nobody expects Europe to bring some military power. No. It's not needed. Europe is the soft power. And I believe that after making several steps, we can generate a high potential, sort of start the potential. Would it be a major breakthrough? Because the Western Balkan experience shows that not necessarily. Well, that's a painful thing, because the Western Balkans is sort of is indicative, like litmus paper. How can we make promises to Ukraine or Sakartvelo or other countries if we cannot meet our promises in Western Balkans? So my position is that we need to walk the talk and keep our promises, whether these promises are NATO membership to Romania, or the NATO membership plan to Sakartvelo, Ukraine, or the membership program for the Western Balkan and maybe other states as well, following that. So Lithuanian policy does not change. We support the NATO and EU membership of the states that aim for it. Of course, reforms are needed, etc., but it could be worked on. And with our promises and us supporting them, they are easier to implement. So your question whether Europe can turn everything into a technical process, well, I would say that just walking just the technical parts and having just the political aim in mind wouldn't lead anywhere. I'd like now to listen us to Professor Dovilė Gniūnaitė from the Institute of Political Science and International Relations, please.
Good afternoon, Minister. Yes, you many answers on foreign policy. I would like to answer as a diplomat. So let's turn to Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine, in eastern Ukraine, is not stably bad, and everything is becoming similar to New Abkhazia. But we don't know yet. Let's imagine that it becomes possible to start mediation with Donetsk and Luhansk territories, and you are appointed the main negotiator in this process. So the goal is clear, to restore territorial integrity of Ukraine. However, as we know, the devil is in details. So what are the results that are possible to attain, and under which conditions you would do it? Simulation. I think that probably so it would be amazing if Lithuania would be entrusted to mediate. I think Europe should also be on board. Also thinking about possible discussions between Armenia and Azerbaijan on Nagorno-Karabakh. Lithuania can be a participant because in many cases we enjoy trust from both sides. This is what happens in the region, and we can discuss how this trust can be restored and how these bridges could be built. But first of all, we have to understand that this is not a political problem, not only political, it is geopolitical problem. Occupied territories are not an outcome of civil war, as Russia tries to present. This is Russia-led and spearheaded conflict. So the first solution is Russia has to withdraw from these territories. It shouldn't be there as a geopolitical player. Then talks are possible. When at the same time they grant passports to local populations, the so-called passportization, or in southern Ossetia, they build fences, they provide weapons, they put new radars, new equipment, or air defense. So what are the talks about? So whom should you reconcile? Russians with non-Russians? This is not a sovereign territory. This is not a part of a nation or a nation which has expressed some will. In fact, this is an occupied territory. And under occupation, it's not possible to have talks. So first of all, there must be two clear counterparts, two clear parties to talks identified. So then Lithuania, together with EU partners, could try to rebuild these bridges of trust. But first of all, Russia has to withdraw from there. Just to follow up on this question, you have mentioned the NATO membership perspective, but is it realistic? Because it doesn't seem that NATO is very open to deliver on this promise of 2008. In Romania, the doors are open. Well, we see that Lithuania is committed to this promise, As a part of this promise,
sutarčių laikymasi ištikimai besilaikanti to paties principo. Kad jeigu jau yra duotas pažadas,
the principle, Roman principle of sticking to treaties and agreements. Once promise is given, it should be implemented pacta sunt servanda. This is the fundamental of our legal system. If we start making reservations and withdraw from our promises, even political promises, it sends bad message in other situations. This is detrimental to the entire system. So let's listen to Marius Laurinavičius from Vilnius Policy Analysis Institute. I have quite a broad question, but in my opinion it's very important. This is the value-based policy declared by the current government, which in fact is a change to the previous policy, at least in some aspects. However, foreign policy is a reflection of state interests. So I would like to hear from you how you understand interests of Lithuania that determined this declaration of value-based policy and this shift in emphasis, and as some people say, excessive burden taken on our shoulders vis-a-vis China or Belarus, as some people say. So this is about the Lithuanian interests standing behind it. Well, I think we have heard, we have managed already to discuss some of our foreign policy tasks. So Lithuania, as a country which has defended freedom, this is a part of our DNC, where DNA, where it is an important part of our identity. So we really feel for the people fighting for freedom, and this is not up to a party or an individual or a single government. This is a certain part of our society's identity which holds us together, and the practical manifestation of this also exists. We discover, we find friends thanks to this policy, and we build coalitions thanks to this, because we are not alone. By helping others, by mobilizing support to our foreign policy, this is what we see, and transatlantic component is important in it. Because the US, which for decades was a certain force of freedom for the world, since Wilson and the right of nations, that self-determination, which gave birth to our February the 16th Act. So Lithuania is a continuation of the same voice in foreign policy, maybe by other tools, by other means, because of our size too. So, in this partnership, which is based on values, there are very practical things that nourish. It makes us more secure, it enables us to reconsider our economic policies, for example, vis-a-vis China in this 17+1 format, by finding new partners and opening offices in Singapore, South Korea or Australia, by choosing partners that are closer to us. So I believe that this value-based policy is not far away from practical policy. This is not a burden, this is an opportunity which enables us to speak in clearer voice and be more sincere and defend the values that we believe in and represent these interests throughout the world without fears that someone will range revenge on us. We know what we do and we have no fear. You have managed non-traditional coalitions. Maybe you could refer to some initiatives like this. The primary focus is on Europe, on the European component, and one of these coalitions and a second discussion which is now underway, which I strongly support from the bottom of my heart, is engagement of Lithuania in security of our southern partners. So we are happy to see Italian pilots in Šiauliai or French troops in Baltic region, Portuguese or Spaniards who rotate in our region during our security. So we are also interested in security issues of our southern partners. So this operation of France in Mali, anti-terrorism operation, trying to stabilize situations there, and discussion which is very timely in Lithuania, whether Lithuania can be involved hand in hand with France and the African states, and I strongly welcome this discussion. I think this is very important, and this would be a possibility for Lithuania to send a message that this is not a problem of France, just like Belarus is not a problem of Lithuania. Both issues are problems of Europe and European security. God forbid, maybe we face another refugee crisis, and Lithuania will be a part of the solution. And we will have to ask ourselves, did we try to mitigate this crisis, to address this crisis? So we have to see challenges for security of our friends and partners, just like we want them to see our security challenges today. So if this is the decision to be more engaged, I would support it. Now Gabrielius Landsbergis from the Lithuanian Military Academy. Dear Minister, Lithuania has multiple challenges. The situation is changing, and there are new powers emerging, and distant challenges become closer to us. So my question is, how is Lithuania ready to respond to challenges emerging in Southeastern Asia, Africa, or in other regions? What are priorities of foreign policy of Lithuania in these regions? We have already discussed it, actually. Still, Lithuania is not familiar to Africa, so I'm not that much engaged, and we definitely could change it. Not only speaking about challenges in the region, for example, in Mali operation, just like searching for new export market, which reveals incredible potential, like Lithuanian export to Nigeria exceeded all possible expectations. During 1 year, a huge bulk of our harvest, whether it even exceeded the export to China, and just they turned away, and they noticed that we are quite a good exporting market, and they bought it. So obviously the potential is there, so obviously it's possible by building ties. So we really have to look at the map, and we do it, and we have to do it by diversification, so that we're not dependent on one purchaser, on one market. To avoid politically engaged or unfriendly markets that have conflicting ideas about the world from ours. Southeastern Asia, I have also mentioned it by economic prism and security prism. Sometimes also depend on export and from undiscovered markets that can be potential for us for further growth, or reducing dependency on certain big markets, but sometimes we're also dependent on import. And this is a big debate about strategic autonomy especially in medical supplies, especially in COVID times, it became relevant that masks come from just one state. The oxygen also comes just from one state, and it can also be restrictive politically because we can't say anything. If the state doesn't like something, then it will be restriction for us. It's understood, but it reduces our security. So to address this problem, we have to diversify it. So there are some possible producers to whom we can talk to reduce dependency on another producer or supplier. Previously maybe overlooked producers. So maybe it felt too far away, but now I think we should get rid of this confidence. So the world is as big for everyone, and for Lithuania too. You have mentioned strategic autonomy, which has very different meaning in different countries, in different communities. What does it mean for you? You have already mentioned it. Maybe it also means autonomy from things that Lithuania wouldn't like to be autonomous, such as the US guarantees of security. We need a clear separation of things, so such as defense and transatlantic umbrella is the fundamental of our security. So we are using their umbrella, and this is the main source of our defense. So discussing strategic autonomy vis-a-vis vaccination or technology, so economic things, I think this is a really worth discussion. Several days ago, Chancellor Merkel mentioned the chip production in the EU. So this economic union, one of the strongest unions in the world, failing to secure its production of chips. So it has to import them just because of economic structure. So this is really something to address. And I'm happy that this government in Lithuania is very serious about the possibility for Lithuania to produce vaccines. We have a potential to become a part of the strategic autonomy for the European Union. So we already now have manufacturing potential. We have human resources, we have know-how and expertise. And, it's good that it is happening. So with Commissioner Breton has strengthened my convictions that we can speak about it, and Lithuania can be on the spur of it. So coming to the question in writing, one of them is about the visit of Breton in Vilnius, and this is a question from Justinas Mitkus, political scientist, whether the enforced landing of Ryanair flight has encouraged new discussions about EU contribution to air defense of Europe, and if yes, what are the initiatives that you can see, and how the economic orientation promoted by Breton is in line with Lithuanian interests of economic diplomacy, and what are the goals of our MFA in this regard. So, of course, we have our eyes very wide open, and quite frequently we see Europe guarantee security, civil population in non-military situation. These treaties work, which is an important message to our 450 million population. So where the European promise is there, it works. So if the Belarusian civil air navigation has agreed with the European one, that there are no lies and there are no wrongful messages. The signature of Europe is very important. in these treaties. So the Belarusian promise was broken. So I can't say that it is exactly the same as September 11th, where also civil aircrafts were used for military operation, not by a state, by a terrorist organization. So what happened next? These rules had to be reviewed. And thanks to that, 20 years afterwards, we still review them, so we can't even carry a water bottle into an aircraft. So the civil rules were revised. And after this case, rules again can be reviewed. What we think about non-democratic regulators and controllers who are dealing with civil things, the same applies to Ostrovets. They're saying, come on, they have the nuclear regulator in Belarus. It's supervising this nuclear power plant. It's safe because they say it's safe. Just like in France, they say it's safe, so we just trust them. Why? Because this is our tradition. We are a part of this tradition, and we trust that civil institution is an independent institution, and we can trust them. But our thing is, come on, is it a civil institution? Alexander called them, and they said, this is the conclusion that you have to produce, and they do it. And the same, he just ordered a certain message that the plane is bombed, and later he remembered that he didn't send the email, so 20 minutes later he sent this email. So this was mentioned by Putin during the meeting. Is it symbolic? This is all in the same context. They understand that Ostrovets is a part of our discussion, and I think it is a good occasion to bring attention back to this question. Why we care about it? It's about whether we trust the air supervision. In the same way, we don't trust the constructors of Ostrovets power plant, because these are politicized actors dependent on political will. So it doesn't.
A few questions. One of them related to 17+1, maybe not in the same name, but in terms of the Chinese response related to, or media channels related to the authorities and calling names to about Lithuania, and what would Western and Chinese relations could be qualified as the Cold War? The answer. In terms of Lithuania and China, these are pragmatic relationships, and we would like these relations to be based on the treaties and agreements, and fact that it doesn't always happen, not due to our fault. That was the situation. I will not comment on all the epithets, which are more descriptive of the speaker than the addressee, but the expectation remains the same. I hope that our European partners will see the reason and benefit in the European context. We're used to our EU27 format on any level, and that's quite a constructive and efficient format. And that community could talk to China, where every member of the 27 countries would have equal rights, whether it's Lithuania, France, Luxembourg, Italy, Malta, we would be around one table and discuss the most important things. That's the thing that I see. And an easier question for at last about Nord Stream 2, which is not very fascinating in Lithuania, Poland, Baltic countries, but they're talking about finishing the laying of the gas line. So what would be Lithuanian position also as related to Germany, and what would what's the view of the Washington position about Nord Stream 2? Don't you think they are making a step back in terms of the regional impact of this Nord Stream 2? I will be open because, well, this project is splitting Europe, and Germany has been uniting Europe for the last decade. And thanks to Angela Merkel's diplomatic effort, Europe has become more united. And perhaps nothing will change, but at the end of her career, we're not focusing on the unity project, but we're focusing on the splitting project, which is now, well, really central, which is really a pity. We're not direct participants of this project. And on the other hand, the same could be said about the US signals about taking off or abandoning sanctions, which basically we can say that is giving more space as a result to the dictators, Putin and others. And the dictators sees that he has several free spaces on in his playing field. I wouldn't relate it directly, but right after these statements, we have faced the situation with the civilian aircraft. And what we want less in our region is brave dictators. Thank you so much. I believe that we can finish our discussion on this nice note. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mr. Minister. And our discussion cycle will continue. Thank you. See you next time.